You might not think of stories and storytelling as a form of magic, but they are, and I'm about to tell you why. Welcome to Better with Books, episode number 14. I'm your host, Roots. I know what this episode is expected to be about. It's my entry into a contest where the rule is, the only rule really, is that the entry must be inspired by the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And it is, but it's not what everyone expects it to be about. It's not about race. And that's not because I'm somehow avoiding the subject. It's not because I don't have anything to say. I have, in fact, written a script about race and prejudice and how and why humans become prejudiced, inspired by Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult. And I think it might make it into the next episode of Better with Books. So I picked up The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and I thought it would be sort of like icing on the cake, the place where I'd find a quote or two to burnish my script with. But then I reached the end of chapter 6, where David Lacks hangs up on the author, and I looked at all the pages remaining in the book, and I had a moment. One of those lightning moments. And I knew that my podcast wouldn't be about race. I thought, that is magic. I am right now as close to magic as I have ever been. At this point, you're confused. You don't understand what part of David Lacks refusing to talk to Rebecca Skloot has anything to do with magic. And honestly, I'd be just as confused as you if I didn't happen to know that I am, at this moment, obsessed with stories. I've always been good at reading them and listening to them, but I've never been good at telling them or writing them down. I know theoretically what it takes to write or tell a good story, but practically speaking, I've never really been able to thread together a tale. I haven't yet formulated a recipe for a good story, a recipe I can wrap my head around and follow. Oh, I've started writing stories before, novels in fact, and I've ended others, but I've never both begun and ended a story. It's an affliction of mine, one I'm hoping can be healed. So here I was at the beginning of a book. The author had just reached a dead end in her quest to telling this particular story, but there were hundreds of pages left in the book. In the end, Skloot must have succeeded, I thought. Otherwise, how could I be holding this many pages? How could this be a best-selling book? For her to have been turned down and yet to have written that much more, to have been so persistent as to have chiseled out of the hardest stone a beautiful gem of a story, Skloot, clearly a magician, must get past this rejection, I thought, and many, many other rejections afterward. Even more fascinating, Skloot wove together the strands of this story, the conflicting threads, the wildly differing lives, the numberless facts and details, and the hours and hours of tape, into a colorful, coherent whole. A whole. A whole that is physically represented in the form of a book. A story. This thing that I, as of yet, had no idea how to construct. And suddenly I had a quest. I decided that I'd let this book teach me about telling stories. I was reading the book in order to find out how she pulled through, how her perseverance and her hope and her faith in her ability to do justice to this tale came to culminate in The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. As I read this book and envied the beautiful way the story was threaded together, almost like a weaving, a blanket of many different colored yarns, I went on Skloot's website and did a little snooping, trying to find some clues. And I did, I found some. Turns out, she's been writing professionally since 2004, and she's had more than 200 feature articles published in major magazines. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Biological Sciences and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction. So, I guess you could say she's qualified to have written The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Not qualified because she has college degrees, or because she has been published before, but because these degrees and published articles and essays are proof of something deeper, something much more difficult to attain. Skill. Now, skill is not talent. Perhaps Skloot's skill as a writer was sparked by talent, by a love for writing that came about because she could write things that her teachers praised and rewarded with good grades. But eventually, all professionals and masters must surpass their own talent. They must reach the unfamiliar waters of not being good enough, of having to try harder and develop abilities that they weren't born with. And that is skill. It's an ability that one has worked very, very hard to attain. So when I say her degrees and articles are evidence of something deeper, when I said skill, I meant practice. Practice is what comes before skill. There is no chicken and egg problem here. Skloot practiced, she became good, she got published, she wrote a best-selling book. But it's not just that, clearly. It's not just skill. Skill is nothing without, and I thought about her making those many, many phone calls, getting rejected almost as many times. Passion? Is that it? A drive to pull through, a belief that the end product, a story that is true and worth it, worth writing, worth reading, is also worth going through a lot of setbacks for. Maybe that's it. The most important ingredient. Maybe it's passion. When there's something you have to say, to tell everyone, so badly that it has to come out, it will. And if, like Skloot, you've done your research over many years very thoroughly, and you've been a writer for years in the process, you've honed your craft, then what's stopping this particular telling of this particular story from being a smash hit? Seeing as this book was a smash hit, I guess nothing. Passion is what arms the storyteller, what protects him or her as they battle the fires and the mountains and the dark valleys. Without passion, drive, they would give up. They would think that this story isn't worth the pain, the rejection, the days and days of sitting down to write and finding it painful to get the words out in a way that satisfies their taste for good writing. Passion, broken down, is believing that the story one is unearthing is worth the time and the effort. It must be told, it must be shared. It is something that will educate and unite and change the lives of many people. I reached the end of the book. The end of a decades-long journey for the writer, and an even more decades-long journey for the characters. Is that it then? Skill or practice? And to run the engine of creativity, passion, the fuel that powers through the toughest days. In the end, Skloot had both of these, and they gave her the research she needed, the interviews she needed, the ability to put words on a page, the scientific know-how, the guts to keep asking, and the perspective to know how to weave disparate strands of time into a colorful, beautiful whole. So, storytelling. Firstly, it's magic. Not because it often features acts of magic and creatures that are magical, but because it is and always has been the glue holding humanity together. I like to think that if everyone on Earth shared the same story, there would be no war, no hate. We'd have no choice but to understand each other. Secondly, stories don't get found or discovered or uncovered. They get dug out, they get carved, they get dragged out of the darkest caves, hauled up the tallest mountains, smelted out of the toughest ores. Stories, and the people who know how to tell them, they boggle my mind. Their tenacity and passion, these traits that shine through in the stories that they tell, these ingredients that are vital to a story ever seeing the light of day, those are mystical to me and to many of us, I'm sure. And so in my mind, I do with stories and storytellers what humans have been doing with inexplicable things from time immemorial. I call them magic. Maybe I'll never be a storyteller. Maybe I'll never find my Henrietta Lacks, the story that I'd like to unearth from the bowels of humanity and history, the story that takes up 10 years of my life to write. But for the sake of creating magic, in a world that we've decided has no magic, I will sure as heck try. A special thanks to Lorain County Community College's Center for Teaching Excellence for organizing this year's One Book, One Campus events. It's been a great experience for me, and I'm sure for all the students and faculty involved. For more episodes like this one, you can find Better with Books on Apple Podcasts or Overcast or SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to get in touch with me personally, I'm on Twitter at Rootsmac, that's ROOTZMAC. Music for this episode is by Broke for Free. The track is called Melt.